why don't you play f6? Well, literally, this is the nightmare worst case scenario of f6. This is the reason you don't play it. All right, we got the white pieces. Start with e4. We'll see what we get. e4 is just a very common move at the lower ratings, so I think it was the right move to choose. We really stumped him here. Oof. We almost got him with just one move. Okay, we have the Caro-Kann. I played a game with the 2 knights, which I think is a very good Caro-Kann line. I'm gonna play d4, which is a bit more normal. d5, good stuff, and many variations, but I think even some of the basic ones need some consideration. So I'll play e5, the advanced Caro-Kann. This is a very common one. You know, first kind of mistake that black could make is playing e6. Because then the best you can do is play c5 and knight c6. And if you did that, you would already be down a tempo on a French. Because why did your pawn go here and then here? So e6 would already be a mistake. Usually you want to get the bishop out. Instead, we see the move f6, which, you know, PSA to low-rated players. That's something you just never do. You just never do it. Okay, so there's a few things here. First thing is bishop d3. If the pawn takes, you know, there's queen h5 check. But to be honest, the king can run away this way. It's not that convincing, and I have to be careful not to go crazy. Also, g6, sack, I win the rook. But sometimes it's like, you know, my whole center is kind of falling apart. Both of those lines are not necessarily as clean as I'd like. And of course, after this is enforced. So that's just the first thing I'm looking at. I don't really know if it's the best moves or anything. Another thing I like is bishop d3 takes and just take back. That's another thing. This bishop can't get developed to either of these squares. So I do like the idea of bishop d3. I like knight f3 because if he takes, I take back, of course. But knight f3 does allow this bishop to once again get developed. So I think I'm gonna go with bishop d3, but after this, I don't need to go queen h5 necessarily. It might be a great move, but I can also just take back on e5. But bishop d3 is often a very good reaction when you see this, because when you see this, queen h5 should be your first thought, and bishop d3 always sets up queen h5. Knight d7. Unfortunately for my opponent, it truly couldn't be a worse move than that. That is hands down the worst chess move on the board. It's not even like a joke, like, oh, haha, it's the worst. It is the worst. I'm allergic to that move. I just had a reaction. I don't even like looking at it. Check, and my opponent is now noticing the king doesn't have any escape squares, and this is the only move. It's gonna take some time to find it. And of course, when we have a great option like this, we will always take with the queen first to deliver a bishop checkmate. I mean, why the heck not? Why would we not play queen takes? This isn't even looking for better, like, you know, not playing the best move available. No, this is playing the best move available. And people need to learn. This is why you don't play f6. Quite literally, this will happen. You will lose games like this. You will get mated with a bishop. Ouch. Just one bishop is all I needed. The rest of his pieces are blocking the king in. And why did it happen? All because of f6, honestly. And this is why it's like there are those basic principles. Why do they exist? Because they prevent stuff like this. Why don't you see people who follow the habit series that I've created? Why don't they have positions that look like this? Well, people don't play f6. That's the thing. Never play it. Why do you think Ben Feingold even comes up with never play f6? It's not like you should never ever do it, but this is the fundamental. Like when you're starting out, you play f6, you're gonna get crushed like this. It's not a good feeling. Oh no, not 100% accuracy with a brilliancy. Oh Lord. Oh, not like this. Dang. But this is the type of painful loss that you need to have at least once in your career, and then you're like, damn, I need to never do that again. All right, so it might not look like much, but this is why I keep saying, like, work on the basic things in the opening. You don't need to learn opening theory, but here it's like if you knew you just weren't supposed to touch this pawn and your goal was to get your pieces developed, you might not play the best moves here. You might blunder in different ways, but at least you might play, you know, pawn here, knight, bishop here, whatever. And those are like not necessarily the best moves, but it'd still be better than what we just saw. So I know that seemed like just a crush, stomp, whatever, but I think it's actually relatively informative for people. Like, why don't you play f6? Well, literally, this is the nightmare worst case scenario of f6. This is the reason you don't play it. Okay, we got the black pieces against e4. All right, I'll go c5. I'll go c5. Can't really, I know a lot of people have actually been interested in like King's Indian, but it just doesn't really work against e4. And e4 is very common at the lower ratings, so I think something like this makes sense. But finally we see knight f3. We haven't actually seen knight f3 against our Sicilian. Now, people usually come with bishop c4, I have to say. It may still happen next turn, so I'm kind of curious to see. The Sicilian I like is e6 in general, but the Sicilian I like at low elo is specifically e6 because I feel like against bishop to c4, there's like no better move. And I'll be excited to play an open Sicilian with my opponent here, and I'm really happy to see it because such an important reminder is like people play this as if it's a Italian game. It's like, no, it's not an Italian. You can't play that. It's not a good line, not a good move. So he plays d4. Well, the way the Sicilian works is you play c5, and when they play d4, you take it. Like, that's just period. You take it. So that's a move we don't need to think about. Knight captures back on d4. So many Sicilians to choose from. a6 here, knight c6 here, even d6. I mean, there's so many playable moves. I will go knight f6, which is a very direct move, right? Immediately attacking the center. If the pawn went to e5 there, I would have queen a5 check to win it. And my opponent immediately plays knight back to f3. And well, you don't have to tell me twice. I will take that center pawn. Take it off your hands. Okay, the knight's coming to e5. Well, this move is just a straight up blunder. What did I say in this position, right? After e5, I said, oh, I'd play queen a5 and win the pawn, right? Well, now I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna win the knight. It's gonna be even better. And there's no way to do anything about that. You can block with just about any piece you want, and it will not help. And it's like, you know, am I doing anything too crazy here? No, just literally attacked a center pawn, did not get defended, so I took it. My opponent moved the knight 1, 2, 3, 4 times in the opening so far. And then this is a common puzzle rush tactic. Get that queen out early, win the knight in the center of the board. And we'll take on e5. So now my opponent should be on the lookout for the e file. So I'm hoping we don't see, I don't know, f3 or like, well, I suppose f4 just barely works. It's still, I know it might be an okay move here. It's still a very bad move. It's kind of fortunate for him that he's attacking my queen here, that he's not just lost. But I will say, like, his instinct to touch the f-pawn there and move it is reminiscent of the last game when black played f6. You just should not default to moving your f-pawn that early. That's just not what you do, right? There's so many better moves here for white that if you had drilled in your head that you were not supposed to touch your f-pawn in the opening, you would play bishop e2. You would play bishop e3, right? You would find other moves to deal with this rather than move the pawn. So this is definitely, I would say, a bad sign. Like, I don't like the move for white. I think it shows that he's not really equipped to deal with the opening very well, because yeah, moving the f-pawn should not be an instinct. That being said, we have a choice to make. Where do we put our queen? Well, queen c5 is obviously tempting because, you know, queen f2 could happen. But I also do need to ask myself, is queen c5 legitimately a good move? How's he going to defend it? Maybe queen e2, and then bishop e3 comes. It's like, is that move actually good? I want to make sure I'm making high quality moves and not just making moves to make moves. If queen f6, bishop e3, queen h4, g3, knight g3, bishop f2. Surprisingly, getting a little concerning there. Although it does look like I have queen takes f4 and queen e4 there. So I think queen f6 might be my move. And the reason I like that is I like this bishop on c5. Queen on c5, that move gets stopped. But bishop on c5, knight f2 is like happening. It's happening. So I like this because it keeps the options open, and d5 will always protect my knight in the middle. And it also keeps attacking this pawn. Like, for example, knight d2, maybe queen takes f4. In mine, I want to play bishop c5. I'd like to see my opponent develop some pieces. Bishop d3, my idea is queen h4. I'm ahead a knight here, but I know about this tactic, and oh, you can just tell the instincts are not there for my opponent. Just so many weak moves in the opening, and all pawn moves, and especially pawn moves on the king side. This is exactly the place you do not want to make weaknesses. That's exactly the place that white has. So queen h4 check. We're certainly going to invade on the f2 square. So king has to move. Let's say king e2. What's the calculation? Queen f2 check. We know king d3 has to happen. Let's say knight c5 check. We actually know that king c4 has to happen. And how do we finish off that that calculation for mate? Surely there's something there. Well, this is, we know we have to start with this. Check. Force the king out. Always gonna be a good move. Now we might need to pause and have a think here. Knight c5, king c4, and you know, is it d5? Is it b5? Everything looks good. Knight c5, king there. Let's find a mate if there is one. Let's say b5 just to pick a move. b5. If he takes on b5, what is our checkmate? Bishop a6. Right? King, well, if king a5, knight c6 is mate. So he's got to play king b4. King b4. Then if we go knight c6, king a3, are we getting a mate there? I'm actually not sure that we are. Surprisingly. Knight c5, king there, b5 takes. Bishop a6, king b4. Maybe there's another move there. You know, like knight d3 or something. But somehow it doesn't feel like it's going to be a mate there. I can tell you one thing. The same reason that we played this, I'm definitely going to play this, because I know for a fact that bringing the king closer to me will always be a good thing. Always. All right, so of course I like d5 a little bit better. The only reason I haven't been going for d5 is technically the queen can take. So in case I was going for a forced mate, b5 would be the way to actually call it forcing. But yeah, d5 is just so much more natural, and obviously we're not going to be afraid of somebody sacking their queen. That's just not going to be a concern of ours. So I am leaning more towards d5 here, but we'll give one more check. d5, let's say king b4. Probably a5. And if the king goes to a3, then we'll use the knight. And I think we have a forced mate there. So I do like d5 here. Our knight's also defended many, many times. There are two moves with the king. Both of them I can bring pieces into the attack with tempo. So not that bothered. After king there, well, I think the simplest, if knight c6, king a3, I think there's a mate there, but it may have to come in the form of knight b3 check. You know, like king takes, knight a5, king there, bishop d7. It's a lot. I think a5 is the way to go, because after the king goes there, then I think all we need to do is move this knight and go for a4 mate. So a5 definitely looks like the move. Again, not even going to bother calculating this, because if the king is coming towards me, he's for sure going towards checkmate. There's no question about that. That's been the case with every single king move thus far. It's gotten closer and closer to mate every time he's gone forward. King a3 does walk into mate, I believe. And instead of letting, like, if I move this knight literally anywhere, there's going to be pawn to b4, right? And then I'm probably still going to checkmate the king. But you'd have to agree, you know, knight d3, b4, pawn takes king, b3. It's not necessarily there no matter what. So the only move that stops b4 and is still a check is knight b3, which looks like the dumbest move because the king can just take it. But then a4, and we've actually opened up our bishop, and every piece on the board covers some squares. So knight to b3. The only other option after this is that our opponent plays king a4, which of course is completely possible. Bishop d7 would be the follow-up, and again, if he takes the knight, a4 still exists. And if he brings his bishop to b5, then we can take it. We can bring our queen in, and there will be mates there. And in this one, this is why we brought the pawn up. When you see how each piece here kind of controls something, and then his pieces cover the rest. So a4 is just a mate. Good game. Good game. And I mean, we can look at the game review, but I think you guys can appreciate that this loss was very much self-inflicted. Very much. I know that was a fancy checkmate, but after knight f6, first of all, when you play the Sicilian, the whole point of having the knight on d4 is to keep the knight on d4. Doesn't make any sense to go like this and just move it straight back. So that's already a mistake. And then you just don't want to move your knight again, then move your knight again, and move your knight again, right? That's not how you play chess. You don't play with one single piece, right? Think about what he did. He moved his knight and then he recaptured a pawn. Understandable. Of course, that's okay. But then he moved it back again. That's already 3 moves. For me, I developed, I made a threat, he didn't answer it, okay. Then I moved it again. If he attacked me, I would move it back. And that's me making 3 knight moves, but I won a pawn out of it. This is him making 3 knight moves, and he hasn't won anything. So already a waste of time with the knight. Now, obviously, this is a big blunder. It loses a whole piece. And after f4, we start to see that his instincts are not right. They're not habitual. Why do I have the habit series? Because it's like, guys, get castled as soon as possible. That should be a priority. Bishop e2, bishop e3. They're both better moves than f4. You don't want to be touching your f pawn. You don't want to be touching a bunch of pawns, to be frank. So he goes f4. And his next move is g4. So you can already tell that, you know, there's just no sense of urgency for development, no sense of danger for the black king, sorry, for the white king. I mean, this diagonal is nasty once someone gets on it. So you need to take some losses this way before you realize, no, you shouldn't be pushing these pawns in the opening as white or as black. It's just crazy. These moves should never be possible. They should never even be on your radar. Queen h4, queen f2, knight c5, and it's just like slowly turning into the exact same thing. Where you look at the end position and of course it's like, oh wow, this was a crazy game. But when you have a king being hunted by all my pieces and you only have pawns moved and a king running around, you know you've done something wrong. Like, big time weaknesses. We keep playing like a 1450. Well, GG to my opponent, but you know, I think that people watching need to be noticing a pattern about how I'm winning these games against 500, 600 so easily. People do not castle. They bring their queen out too early. They're moving like bunch of pawns and the same piece twice or 3 or 4 times in the opening. They're not developing all their pieces. And all those things, and it's not much more than that, it's really just those things. They all contribute to very, very quick losses. like that.